all the different odd side stories or side quests that I've been on through my life have all influenced and built parts of my knowledge base and my inspiration and desires, and have kind of all coalesced here at this point.
Welcome to the GOAT Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Cassinan. At GOAT, we define sustainability through the lens of intentionality, circularity, and community. With this framework, any problem can be solved. The stories that we share, the pioneers that we talk to, show us a different way to build the future we all want to have.
We're at a pivotal moment where nuclear is needed more than ever. Let's once and for all become a circular economy.
Waste is not cost neutral. Like, it always costs your business something. So if you can get rid of that, then that's good for business as well.
There's this dissonance. We talk a really good game about protecting the ocean, but the purchase decisions that we make don't match with our espoused values.
An ideal food system revolves around relationship. Where is my food coming from? Who's growing it? How is it being grown? And why does that matter?
Thanks for being here. Let's dive into the conversation. You come from a background of being a designer. So what kind of got you interested in design in the first place? Was it just this curiosity about the world, or did you just fall in as an artist? Like, what was it?
Yeah, it's from being an artist. And then, I didn't even know people made decisions about what they wanted to do with their life. And literally until my brother, who's older, 2.5 years older than I am, was graduating from college. So I'm already at university at this point, and I didn't know people made decisions like that, because it's just something that my course was always set for me in my mind, which is like, I'm going to be an artist. And that was just, I don't have a lot of items from when I was a little kid anymore, but I have this one first grade little notebook that you were given, and it has in there this statement that says, I want to be an arbist, misspelled completely. The R is backwards because I had dyslexia. And, but I was like, and from that has never wavered. I found other passions along the way. Like, I fell in love with science, and I was like, oh, I'll be a scientific illustrator. I fell in love with, anything I fell in love with, I was like, oh, but astronomy. Oh, but I'm going to draw pictures of the stars, So there's always this way of, well, I love this, so how do I make that art related as well? And my brother was a very scientific kind of mind. He was graduating from University of North Carolina in geology, and called me up, and he was like, it kind of panicked, and he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? You just got a degree in geology. You're going to do geology stuff. I don't know what. He's like, but I don't know what I like to do. And it really blew my mind. And I think I didn't realize it because also I went to Rhode Island School of Design for my undergrad. And everyone there is also so driven and focused, and typically has never really um, made these tough decisions of going into art. Although people do. And later on, I found out that was a difficult decision for a lot of people. More, not that that's not what they wanted to do, but coming to terms with that, that's something they could do. So that for me I've always been driven by art and the need to express that in a visual way for myself, express me and ideas. So, which is, I have always said, one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given, mostly because I can't really be mad at the decision I made to go into art, because it's been so hard for so long. If I had decided to do that, I probably would have times been like, "You're such an idiot for doing this," and luckily I don't have to, beat myself up for a bad decision, since I didn't really make one, so to speak.
What do you think, I guess, influenced? I mean, so when you come through that, I don't know, ability to actually draw, like if you give me a pencil and paper, it's stick figures. Like it's bad. And I know part of it comes from practice, but you give me a camera and I can do something with it. Do you feel like you kind of had this natural born ability that you then just had to kind of shape from there? Or what do you think kind of influenced that dive into art? Because I think a lot of people are kind of like, well, I'm not an artist, or I may not think creatively, so let's just like cancel all that out. But I feel like the pursuit of art actually gives you a better look at the world.
That's a great question. I think that there definitely is innate physical talents that you're born with. Basketball players are athletic in a certain way, but they probably could have been molded into a different type of athleticism. And I think artistic people have natural inclinations in different directions with good eye-hand coordination. You have there's a certain bit of a memory loop that's necessary if you're going to be an observational drawer, which is what I was. Um, and there are other ways, and I found this really fascinating as I was going through RISD, was meeting all these other ways of processing that visual loop that different people had. Some I was super jealous of. The people who could just draw from their head, like human forms, and like have faces come to life really beautifully. That was never my skill set, which frustrated me for a long time. and but I could look at something and I could draw it really well. And part of that was I don't think I was ever the most gifted and most naturally uh, visual documenter out there. Like I spend a lot of time training myself to be better at that particular skill set. Um, I think where the combination of that with the greater skill set I had, which was creative thinking, and my brain being wired in such a way that I didn't make the normal connections I think that people make when they see things or think about things. I have a really weird spatial memory. So I could draw you a map of every building I've been in since I was a little kid.
Really?
Yeah. I can memorize video game maps. It's a relaxing pastime for me as I play video games. And I'm good at them because I just remember the map. Like I walk through it and it's like I'm been there and I can see that map again, years later and know exactly how to get around. Same with driving around cities. So I've moved to 13 different cities and I could give you visual directions on how to drive somewhere in any city I've been before because I can close my eyes and I can walk through spaces. So, which is sort of like the most useless superpower ever. So it's sort of like a photographic memory, but it's a three-dimensional space. And I learned later on there's this test about like your visual acuity, and that if you imagine an apple and you can visualize that turning around and upside down and be able to see it actually kind of rotate like you're watching an animated movie. That's one type of visual processing, and that's something I can do. Like I can have that split open, um, and so that I think was where my real strength was, and then figuring out how to bring the automated functional mechanical part of my hands and eye loop up to par to be able to start to pair that and be able to express that and figure out how to actually match up things that were at different levels without becoming super super frustrated during the process, which is I think what college is all about. You go in and I think I spent 90% of my time being frustrated by my artistic expression ability because it never reached where my mind was. Yeah, part of it's letting go of that to be able to, and learn. That took a lot. I think probably like in my 40s by the time I actually got to a point where I was really comfortable at saying, it's not going to ever be this idea. And that's sort of beautiful. So I can have one idea and work towards that expression. But if I start at the same point and just listen to what's happening, it's always going to come out different because I'll be different during that process every single time. So it can never be the same. So you can have infinite results from one starting point heading towards one finish point if you let go of the control and you're not in conflict with that control. You actually enjoy the process of wherever it goes to.
I love that. It's so, gosh, that, did you ever find it overwhelming? Like, I mean, just from a sensory input perspective, because I mean, I sometimes when I'm in public, that's kind of how I get a lot of my visual inspiration for the stuff that I create. And every once in a while, like you just need to take a break from it. Like, did you ever find in one of those 13 places where you lived that it was just kind of overwhelming with the amount of information you were taking in? Or was it just kind of like this natural process?
That's wow. I've never thought about overwhelming specifically. New York City, yeah, it is. Like, yeah, thinking back, I can say it definitely is because I lived in Colorado and in Utah and loved camping and being outdoors. And although nature is super stimulating, it's a very different type of stimulation visually. Um, and then moving to New York City in 2001 was the ultimate level of stimulation. it's constant. And I did find it difficult to um, quiet my mind down a little bit. Like I think I developed more kind of escapist activities. Like I didn't really play video games ever until I was in New York City, which is a weird, like, you're gonna go look at stimulating things visually, but it's very controlled, and it turns off part of your creative brain in a way for me.
That's fascinating. And so when you started, what did your professional life start to look like as you were like, okay, I'm gonna do art, I'm gonna be a designer. Where did you kind of go after college?
So I studied in at RISD. I think it's probably best to start at this point, because I have sort of dual lanes of thought about my career and how I ended up here. Um,
It's never really a linear path.
right? Yeah, which is great. It would be too fast otherwise. So I went into RISD, and my freshman year at RISD, RISD's great in that everyone takes the same classes your freshman year. It's called your foundation year. It's 4 classes you're taking: a graphic design class, basically, which is 2D. You're studying drawing, so you're drawing the figure. You're taking 3D, you're learning about objects, and then you're taking art history. So those are your 3 main kind of core classes, and it's to make sure you're exposed to a variety of things and understand how thinking through the creative process and all these different modalities is really important. No matter which direction you end up going, you can apply all these different ways of thinking to the same problem, even in one output form. So I went in with a much more graphic design kind of thought process, and discovered much more freedom in kind of the drawing and painting. And I wanted to go into painting, but at the time, but I loved painting the figure and portraits because I love psychology, and that's a big portion of where my art comes from, is the exploration of ourselves and others. But uh, the teachers at that time in the painting department, when I went on the tour of the departments to declare a major, were all non-representational painters, and the output that was coming out in the senior shows was all non-representational painting. And I went to the illustration department, and there were these amazing painters painting figuratively, and the output of the work coming out of the illustration department was really was very different than what I imagined it would be. There was a lot of real painting happening in that department, and so I decided to go into the illustration department, and that sort of set me up to be straddled in 2 different realms of my profession going forward. Was that I was trained to do illustration, but I also studied fine arts painting. I took all the painting classes I could while I was there with amazing painting professors. And by the time my senior year rolled around, I was attending 1 class in person because everything else was all painting theses and independent studies, and really worked the system very well. And just would go to the studio and paint all day. And it was great. I mean, I can't say enough great things about my time spent at RISD. Was magical, really. Um, so when I graduated, I had these different um, tool sets, and went out into the world thinking I'm just going to be a painter, uh, but not in a naive way, like knowing it was going to be a hard grind. Um, it was a harder, longer grind than I expected.
What was the traditional path for people? Like when they did, like, what was painting at that time? Because I don't know, I don't think a lot of people understand like what the art world looks like unless you're in the art world. So like you see galleries, and then you see, billboards, and those are, used to be painted or designed in small scale. So like what did it look like to be, I'm going to go make a career painting?
Yeah, well, both those industries have changed dramatically and are no longer at all the same.
Correct.
so,
Correct.
so I graduated in '95. So, Photoshop was something still sort of new. No one had Mac computers in their houses unless you were a designer who was doing graphic design. Um, no one had iPhones or websites. It was a very different world. So the process of trying to get into a gallery was very different, and you're sort of the business aspect of your career as taught was something that became completely defunct in like 10 years after me graduating. So you had these, you had to carry around. If you wanted to be an illustrator, you had to move to New York City, basically, or LA, depending on kind of the genre you wanted to work in. I moved to Salt Lake City. So I was clearly not trying to follow that path. Um, yeah. And so from 95 to 2001, it took me that long to end up in New York. But I was trying to find galleries to show in. And so you would go to openings, you would try and meet people, you had to have a body of work, you would have to get it photographed afterwards, you would have to then have slides, you would submit your slides. So if you wanted to, you would have to actually buy a, remember carousel slide projectors?
Oh yeah.
So you would have to buy a carousel, you would load your slides in position and mail those off or drop them off in person and then hope that you got them back. But so the cost of this was just astronomical. Yeah. Right? Or just a link, yeah, to your website. It is, so it was a super time consuming. It took a long time to do. You had to write up an artist statement, and you had to kind of know somebody that was actually going to receive it there and actually look at it because they would have these stacks of carousels there. And you know, later on when digital, you could start to print things out. You could have a binder and you would print them out really nice and have them in sleeves, and then you could go and you could drop off your whole portfolio. So you could only apply to a couple of places at a time unless you were mass producing these things, which you of course you couldn't afford to do. um, we would, I remember when I first got to New York, this was still sort of the mo, and we would get together with some of the painter friends of mine when there was like a competition being called up or something where you had to send off your carousel, and we would have slide taping parties basically, because you had to like get this metallic tape and take the cover off the slide and tape around the edges so your borders were perfectly crisp and nothing else showed but your painting, because otherwise they would reject you just on the fact that there was like wall showing. So yeah, so it was very different. It was a lot more hands on, and it's easy to get really frustrated with that process and be shut out. Um, the industry still has a lot of gatekeeping happening in it. Um, so I went out, but I was that's what I was trying to do. And so for the first few years, it was mostly just trying to build up a body of work that had kind of the cohesive feel to be able to try and get a gallery representation. And you would submit to like trying to be in a group show as you go along. And I didn't want to spend, and this is where I took advantage of my my long history. So I worked a lot growing up. So manual jobs. So I had 4 jobs all through college. I was, took the garbage out and mowed the lawns at the university at RISD. Was a TA. I monitored the equipment room. I cut the wood in the wood shop for students who were buying it. So, and I worked at a museum when I lived in DC in high school. So I had a long history and a lot of skill sets of like carpentry and a labor manual labor jobs. I've been a carpenter's assistant, and I just continued to rely on those. Like, so I went into the things to pay the bills that were not creatively oriented because I actually didn't want my creative energy used, because I had a lot of physical energy and I knew that I could come home after, doing a hard manual labor job or customer service, waiting tables, coffee shops. I mean, you name it, I've done it all. Worked at a call service, but I could come home and know that I still had like creative energy there, and that I could muster the physical energy because of youth, which was nice to have back then. um, to be able to then spend the next few hours I had before I really had to go to bed to get up and do it again, painting, and that's what I did for years.
Do you feel like the physical side actually helped the creativity? Like of doing the opposite rather than just fully going in. I mean, I would imagine, and I've been in this position too, where all you want to do is create. Where you're like, man, life would be so great if I could just only create, right? But then when you reflect back on it, you're like, actually, I was kind of happy I did those things because now I have a better vision with my creativity of what I want to do.
100%. Yeah, I think you nailed it. That's 100% it. The other nice thing about the more mindless the physical job, the better, because then you could sort of put your body on autopilot. Like I cut stone for a couple of years, um, slate. So you're like on a wet saw, you're sawing through just, 1/4 inch pieces of stone down to little coaster size. And then you would use a sandblaster to spray. They were coasters, rock coasters. And I did that in Boulder, Colorado. But you could, it's sort of like you get hooked up to a machine, and it really is this incredibly long hours, hard manual labor of repetition. But you could turn your brain off from having to think about it after you got good at it, and then just think. And for me, that was great because I can run like kind of movies in my head. So it was. You're totally right. Like that ability to be able. So I had all this thinking time, this creative thinking time that I was kind of getting paid to do, and then go home and try and work on expressing it. Yeah.
It's so interesting. Like when you think about where you're at now, I mean, you're running Fair Share Publishing. You guys are getting into book publishing, and to me, it almost seems like the upending of kind of the same thing of like the art industry being so just you have this step and then you have this step and then you have gatekeepers and then you have this like what's the publishing industry like? Because I mean, you see right now a bunch of people, you can publish books on Amazon, you can self-publish, you can go to a publisher, you can get picked up, Barnes and Noble, start speaking, you're famous. Like there's almost like this career path, right? To actually become a writer now or publish a book. But I feel like that's not at all what the industry actually is like. So kind of what's the history of, I guess, book publishing, but also what's it kind of been like in the transition now? Because I feel like technology is starting to shift.
Yeah, and yes, it's had two major shifts, I think, recently. Um, the very few things have changed since the 1940s in terms of the actual structure of it. I think there was a big shift when print on demand came, and that opened the door, and social media, and that opened the door to a lot of novice writers who wanted to try and break into the industry. So there was this kind of crack through the normal system. Um, I don't know when print on demand really became popular, like maybe 5, 6 years ago. Um, Before that, it was really you had to get an agent, and you know it was a long slog, just like the gallery system was. You kind of had to know somebody who knew somebody to get somebody to read your manuscript, and they. I had a really good friend who's actually our editor now for Fair Share, one of our editors, who had a day job when he was first starting out. He's in his 70s, so he's been at it a little bit longer than I am. Um, he had an internship where his job was to read the first sentence of a submitted manuscript, and if he liked the first sentence, he put it in a stack, and then that went to the person that read the first paragraph. And if that person liked the first paragraph, they would push it up the chain into another stack, and then that person would bother to read the first page. And if it got past the first chapter was read, so it's like 4 steps, then the person that actually made any kind of decision past that read the book or started, skim the book. And he got so depressed doing this. Like he quit writing, he quit that job for a long time because it was just like there's some intern who doesn't know anything that if I don't like the first sentence, your manuscript doesn't exist
I
anymore.
mean, it's almost the opposite of the don't judge a book by its cover. They're literally reading the first sentence and judging if it's good or not.
Yeah, and it's gotten a little bit worse since then. I mean, that was 25 years ago. He told me that. Now, a lot of the decisions are made through looking at a sort of a publication of data about money. So they see what your book is about, the category it kind of falls into, and then they look up the statistics on the sales on that category and the comparables in that category before they even read it and decide, no, this doesn't sell well, so we're going to move on. Not all publishers are like that, and this is speaking kind of from how larger publications work and why a lot of indie publishers are out there and successful because they approach finding material in a very different manner. Why some people like working with independent publishers, smaller publishing houses, over larger ones because you do get the attention and the care, and that plays out in other aspects we'll probably get into as well later on. Um, so, in terms of the big moment of changing, I saw a window in the past 2 years to really bring Fair Share to life. It had been an idea, a desire of mine for probably 14. From I started teaching at Parsons in 2002, and in the illustration department. And I worked with a lot of my peers were in the illustration, but also in the children's book illustration industry. I had good friends that were illustrators that won awards and were outstandingly talented and barely could make a living because the amount of money that went to them in the end was so small. In fact, they made most of their money from selling the original artwork, the paintings they had done for the illustrations. They made more from that than they did from their advances and their royalties, which is shocking. And so always, that always bothered me. And it's true for almost all content creators of any ilk throughout time. We see the least amount of money of our creative product through the lifespan of that creative product. Is it 19? I think in late 60s or 70s, Congress actually did a study on industries and found that artists were the lowest compensated for their effort of any other industry, which I thought was fascinating. And at that time, California started to allow you to have in a contract a royalty, resale royalty. I don't think it ever was enforced by anyone or been able to be chase it down. Galleries didn't include it for you. So, but the idea was that if you sold a work and then whoever bought it sold it again for twice as much, you would be able to get like a 10% commission off of it if you wanted. But that's really hard to prove. Um, but I've had that little bit of information in my mind somewhere for a long time. And when I heard about Web3 blockchain technology and NFT contracts, the smart contract that goes along with that, I got really excited about the possibility of there actually being an enforceable automatic royalty contract attached to the sales of your paintings and artwork. And that ended up leading me into the NFT space, which ended up leading me back into finding a way to solve some of the problems that needed to be solved for publishing. So that it all kind of ended up connecting back to this desire to change the way that artists were paid in that particular industry for children's books.
Well, and I think that now is probably the perfect time to discuss a little bit about NFTs, just from this concept of like right now it's a massive uphill battle because you look at everything that happened with the space, like just absolute utter chaos.
Yeah.
A lot of fraud, a lot of theft, a lot of really, really, really bad things associated with it. Now, almost in the industry, you don't even want to say the word NFT. You don't necessarily want to say Web3. You don't necessarily want to say blockchain. And I totally understand why, because I've loved the industry, honestly, since the beginning. But I guess if you could speak to a bit of like what the actual technology is meant to be rather than how it was kind of, I guess, abused in the last like year and a half, where everybody now hears the word and they're like, ooh, run the other way. skip podcast end.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, it has really been rife with grifters, but I think that is not unique to NFTs. That's sort of any new.
.com boom.
Yeah, it's gonna AI is happening now. It's whatever the new thing is that people that there is confusion and it's a complicated process. Um, that gets leveraged against like emails when they first came out. It's the old Nigerian prince letter that goes around, like, please, I've got this funds and help me. I don't know if all the listeners are old enough to remember those emails that went out, but
Oh yeah.
it was the scam of the day. And that just has been, a new dress for the same party. So NFT and blockchain. So blockchain technology is um, the best way to talk about it is in terms of a ledger system. So if you imagine someone keeping the books for a business, and they write down the additions and subtractions, that's your ledger. And you're reliant on one person to make sure that that's accurate. You don't want anybody else to get hold of that ledger and make changes. You don't want there to be an accidental miscalculation by that one person. So imagine now if you had 100 people all have a ledger doing the same calculations, and no one ever was sure who the 100 were that had those ledgers, but they all had to then anonymously come up with their solutions and report back and all have the same answer. So if one person made a mistake, you would know that was an exclusion and that would be rectified. If one person got their ledger stolen, you would have those other 99 to kind of be able to verify it. And that is the um, decentralization that everyone talks about in terms of the ledger system of blockchain. It's having this system of nodes. So everyone that's keeping those ledgers are called nodes, trusted nodes, to be able to go and verify information. And everyone's got to come back with a consensus of, yes, this is correct, or yes, this belongs to this person. So when you add on top of that technology, um, the software that's capable of reading and writing contracts that are executable, that allows you to have an automated system of verification, proof, evidence, and functionality all tied together. So now, when you want to buy or sell something, you can use a contract that's on this blockchain, and that will execute whatever it is. So if it's ownership for a product, it will say, yes, I verify that it is ownership, and it'll have a picture of what that image that you own is. Now, that picture is what the NFT is pointing to. The NFT really is the contract, the non fungible token is just a pointer, and it points to anything. It could point to a word, it could point to music, it could point to film, photography, paintings, whatever it is. And it is a way of authenticating and proving that you own it, where it's been, who's owned it before you. And if it has a functionality attached to it, then you can use it for that aspect. And the great thing about it is it's still being developed. The ideas that people can have now of how to build on that base concept, because it really is a beautiful base structure that allows so many different things to be built. And I think it's one of the few spaces that's still in modern times. If you have an idea, you can actually go and build in the space without huge funding because it's still very small in reality. There's a lot of people all very excited and very interested about building and what can happen, and all agree that there are big changes possible and hopefully changes for the good possible. And I think that that's where a lot of magic is happening in the space, are people who are not necessarily trying to create fast money, but create real structural changes within different industries and spaces to leverage the technology to make something simpler, quicker, easier, more accessible. Um, Crypto is built on this same blockchain system, so it's hard to talk about NFTs and not talk about crypto because of the money attachment. And money comes back and attaches to everything in all industries. So uh, there, of course, when you say there's money out there and it's decentralized, you're going to get scams. And the reporting of, good stuff is not super sexy, but the reporting of $1 million JPEGs that are being hawked by celebrities and are of a monkey that's, questionably well crafted art, it's it's sensational. It's very sexy news. So it's really done a bad. The industry sort of done it, has not done itself any favors. It's not helped its image um, by continuing to hold these up as revered projects. Um, but there are a lot of really great projects out there. There are people that are using the blockchain to fund mangrove recovery planting. And so so basically, sort of your donation to reforesting mangroves, which are super important for environmental health all over the world, they actually get planted. And you can see where the money's going, because the other really great component of blockchain is it's an open ledger. Everyone can see where everything goes. Everyone's wallet number, which is basically like your banking account, you know, is visible. You may not have the names attached to them, and that's where the privacy part of it comes in. But you can at least see that this went here and this went there and it went over there. So if you donate for a tree being planted, you can see where that money goes. And there's one organization that's done this in particular that then geo positions your mangroves, and you can actually then go back and see, and they give you updates on how this grove is doing. And so there are ways, if you imagine how you can implement change, putting things onto blockchain can be very advantageous. Maybe not for every single industry, but I think there are portions of every industry that eventually will be using blockchain. And I know that the corporations are all super excited about blockchain, and they are waiting for regulation to kind of get ironed out a little bit more before they jump in. But they're going to use different terminology, so it's not attached to NFTs. Disney just announced that they're going to have a digital pins that you used to. Have you ever been to Disney World or Disneyland? And there are people that they get, they have the, oh, what are they called?
The overalls with all the pins.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
all those pins now, they'll be digital. But they're NFTs. But Disney's not
But
saying
don't
it.
say that.
Don't say
Yeah.
NFTs. Yeah. There's a contract. You can prove you have these. And so that's, you know, it's coming. And I've talked to CMOs from really large corporations about NFTs, and the NFT space is small enough now, especially in the bear market. And you go to the conferences, you get to talk to people who are heads of departments at big corporations who are there, and they've put millions of dollars into it. They're not announcing it yet because they're waiting, but it's coming, and everyone will be. It'll be a transition, just like everyone eventually stopped having a paper ticket to get on an airplane, and now they have a QR code. But tell me the date that stopped happening. When did that switch over? It just everyone.
Oh, I love that you put it that way. Yeah, that transition, because I think that what drew me to the blockchain space and really just the idea of Web3 is this. It's the traceability and the transparency with the privacy. I find that to be really the secret to make it powerful, is because it allows, and specifically if you were to apply this more to sustainability, you can't hide anymore. Like, everybody knows the organizations where, they donated and they're like, well, is the money actually getting there? And everybody usually has that question because they're trying to do good in the world, yet you have to trust and hope that it's actually going that direction. And it's hard to actually tell if that's going to be the case. And to me, blockchain was always that opportunity to actually show, yeah, here it is. And then to me, it almost allows the world to say, well, let the most honest person win, which I think is quite ironic considering where the crypto and blockchain space is at the moment. But the promise of the technology, I think, is still rooted in that. And I think that's a very exciting thing about it. I guess my question would be, when it comes to, I mean, part of it is an energy question, but you look at computing power. Is this just a matter of time of the cost of computing, the efficiency of the platforms? Because some of the arguments we're exploring blockchain technology with Goat, and part of the things that we were running into was the actual energy usage to maintain the blockchain would actually have more of a negative impact than just doing the thing yourself. What does that look like in terms of technology?
But they've been making huge strides at this, and I think that is something that probably a year ago was a much more relevant argument against it. The amount of energy that Ethereum used for a single transaction has been reduced by 99%. They've changed from, let's not get into the weeds with terminology, but they changed the way that the authentication process happened to make it much more energy cost efficient. So now a month of Call of Duty servers is equivalent to a year of what Ethereum exchange rates would be. I don't think that's 100% accurate, but it went from being the blockchain verification was one of the highest users of output of energy to streaming TV. So if you're really worried about it, you have to get rid of your Netflix first. You have to then stop playing your YouTube. There's so many other mass computing power drainers out there, and there are again, we try not to get too into the vocabulary of it, but there's a lot of other chains now. So there's that are built, and they're called layer twos, that are built on top of these layer ones that are super cost efficient, that the transaction fees are very, very low, which is called gas prices, basically. Um, and there are huge strides in that area. And I think they're going to continue to get more and more efficient. sort of like, when TVs first came out, they were really expensive. Then as they became more ubiquitous, the price of those goes down. It's the same with all technology. It starts off very, very high priced, very, very costly in production in terms of environmental standards. But very quickly, if it's going to have mass application and mass use, that all comes down exponentially fast. And that's already happening in the space. So I think probably within a year it'll be almost nominal consideration for versus whatever you're solving for. We never will get to zero energy. I mean, that's just how everything functions. Something's got to burn for something else to happen. You know,
It's physics.
yeah, that's how it works. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, we're functioning at absolute zero temperatures all the time.
Exactly. um and I think what's interesting about it is it's going back to that concept of, in the 70s and then later being able to get a royalty on something. It's to say, hey, you produce this piece of artwork, and down the road you actually can earn, if somebody buys or sells this piece of art, the provenance of something. And I think that's, I mean, we know a company who is kind of the owner, so to speak, of that patent, of that process of provenance. And it's like, how do you tell that bat that hit, the Game 7 World Series, how do you know that bat's real? And I think that's a lot of the questioning that comes into the process of anything digital. Is like, is this the real one? Whether that's digital or physical, it's like you get this is one of 100 books. How do you know? Did somebody just write 100 and then sell it? You don't actually know. And it's a way to actually prove that. And so I guess when you look at the publishing industry now, I mean, how has the publishing industry kind of worked in terms of, beyond just the getting picked up as an artist? How does it generally work in terms of actually the monetary aspect, the distribution, and then how is kind of fair share kind of taking on the problem?
Yeah, those are great points. And so the I think the best place to start would be where the book gets made. So if you think about, well, we'll come back to the author, illustrators, the creators in a little bit, but most books by the big five, which are the five largest publishing houses, and they're referred to in the industry as the big five. And then there's the plus Amazon. So Amazon's oddly, it's yeah, it started off in books, and there's actually a new development that I'll come into where Amazon is looking to now disrupt back into publishing. I think there's a hint I'll go into a little bit. But so the big five, most of their books, because of cost, are printed overseas, like a lot of our products here, right? Manufactured in China or India, or Italy. Then is like third, I think. Um, they're then put onto. So there's some components there that are um, improving. So the forestry issues that are a big concern in publishing in general, because everything is made with trees in the publishing industry, just about. So are is that practice being looked at and sustainable in those countries, and how is that verified? So there is the Forestry Service Commission. Uh, there's a worldwide organization that kind of looks at rating how different companies are using, especially publishing industry, and so you can get certified. So everyone within the United States that prints in the United States has to fall within these guidelines, just because of the standards of forestry in the United States currently. But overseas, they're starting to come up to meet some of those regulations, but the majority of them are not. And we also are not sure about how verifiable they are. There are, I think, chronically work standard issues in certain countries, and I think also there's ink production and environmental concerns as well. There's no OSHA, you know, so after books are made there, they get packed up in crates, put onto uh, a boat that comes typically all the way to the LA harbor and offloaded. And so that boat ride is the equivalent of driving 8 million miles in a car. Yep. Yeah. The long distance cruisers tankers have to they actually switch fuel types. when they're 100 miles offshore, and then they have to switch it back when they get 100 miles within port distance because it's so pollutant. They're not allowed to burn that type of fuel that they burn in the open waters within 100 miles of land. So
Not like
it's
the ocean's not connected by any way, shape, or form. It's not like
right.
it eventually gets to the shoreline. It's
Yeah,
fun.
air does go
Yeah.
everywhere. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a big, environmental impact there. And then so once they get to the LA port, then they go typically to a warehouse. And then from the warehouse, you get loaded on and taken to a distribution warehouses across the United States. And then from there, they go to the bookstore, and then you drive to the bookstore, pick it up, and drive home. So that's sort of the physical process of how a book gets manufactured into your hands.
And how does the economics work at that point? Because I'm just thinking about you buy a book for $18.95. How does all that make sense?
Well, this is one of the reasons that it, you know, there are so many steps in the process that have not been updated to be more efficient and streamlined because they're set, right? And they haven't changed in so long. It's a big lift to change things. And corporations are not known for their great pivoting ability, right? They're not the wide receiver; they're the linebackers. One direction, knock everything down. So it's not surprising that things haven't changed, and the model works for them very well because they are also the distributors as well. So when you sell a book at 18.95, which is the typical price point for a children's picture book, you are first getting the cost of the printing materials and the shipping and distribution and all these other taxes all coming off of the value of it. Then you also have for large publishing houses the cost of their employees. They have very large infrastructures, legacy infrastructures that probably don't really need anymore, like office buildings. I think Manhattan and other cities are grappling with this now and this move post pandemic to have remote workers. And there's a really big fight in New York City because they want you to come back because they need that income back to those buildings. So there's a lot of push for New York City employers to make everyone come back. Hence Jamie Dimon's push to make everyone come to office. Um, so you have these legacy weights. They have to pay health insurance costs. They have to pay, for a large number of employees. There's a lot of processing involved, and then there is the distribution issue. And this is one of the other aspects that ends up affecting creators as well. So typically, a book contract with a publisher in a bookstore functions sort of like this: you sell a bookstore 100 books, and they have about 6 months to sell those 100 books. So they pay you for 100 books. But at the end of 6 months, if they've sold 50, the publisher has to buy back the 50 unsold books and pay for the shipping again back to them. So they actually can't do anything. That reserve, that money that they got for those first 100 is sort of locked up for at least the 6 month period. Now, hopefully they've done a good job of estimating, but typically they don't. It's about 25 to 30% of your inventory is returned back to you as publishers, which is a pretty steep
That's
amount,
steep.
right? So you have to account in for that. And for larger corporations, they have so much liquidity and so many books, they're able to continue to function, and it's not a huge stress on them if one book is getting returned and one's not. It's a numbers game. So, and that comes into sort of their philosophy of what they choose to print as well, unfortunately. For smaller indie publishers, this having to hold on to that is really, really problematic because their margins of functioning financially are very, very tight. And it's one of the number one causes for independent publishers to fold is the buyback loss that they're not expecting, where they're not managing the funds well or those relationships. So that's just with one bookstore, right? So you have that 6 month going. Now imagine you've got a bunch of books going to hundreds of bookstores that all have different contract start and end dates. And you've got to then figure out the royalty payout to the creators. So royalty tracking becomes a really, really massive issue. And this is something I would imagine should sort of be a no-brainer for uh, big industry to use blockchain to be able to do royalty management. And it's one of the areas where we're using that is to be able to track that. But the cost of managing the royalty system, is really, really expensive. There are a few companies that actually it's third party. They actually hire. They specialize on it. Yeah, and those cost a ton. And if you're an independent publisher and you want to get in, it's about 30 grand a year to lease the software to do it. So it's another huge hurdle of entry into it. So that also then has the effect of the creators get paid every 6 months, but they also have no idea how much they're going to get paid every 6 months. So imagine working and then like can I afford my car? Like, I hope so. I hope my book's doing well. The numbers of books sold are not a shared number. It's a very opaque industry. So another area that traditional publishing suffer from is this lack of transparency. Um,
Yeah, so like a New York Times bestseller, right? Is that is that volume? Is it paid for popularity? Like what's because when it is opaque, I mean, you may not want to share. Oh, we sold 1 million books. Well, maybe it was only 100,000, but it was a bestseller. So in that month, like what? How do they gauge some of those things?
I would, without getting in too much trouble,
Yeah.
I would, I would, I had it. It's funny. This morning, I was talking to a guy who, his former business many years ago was to get authors. It was on the New York Times bestseller, and it's a pay to play. They would pre-sell the books to single large groups, and then they used there was a third party that did the distribution for them, and would send it out for free to this big list of people that wanted free books. But who paid for it and where the books were going were not tallied together. And so it would just look like 1 million people bought 1 million copies. And they would automatically from the public. So this was all done before the book even hit the newsstand.
And this isn't blockchain, by the way.
No, this is yeah. This is old school rigging.
Old school, yeah.
Yeah. And this is actually exactly what happened with some of the NFT products. Was they took the old scam models and just put it in the new dress, and they've done the same thing, and that's where a lot of people kind of lost their shirt. But it's the same pay to play. So the day the book opens, it was a New York Times bestseller. People are doing the same thing to manipulate the Amazon's top sellers list, and there are always ways to kind of game these bestsellers lists. So that yeah, um, it's
And so how does that work though if you're actually trying to make it as a writer, an illustrator, a publisher, how do you break through that? Um because to me that anybody can do it if you have enough capital to throw at it.
Yeah, so each one of those breaks through in a different way. So you have authors typically almost always have to find an agent. So which do a great service. A good agent is out there finding the right publisher to publish your work and getting you work. Illustrators have agents, and the right agent is going to be out there finding you work. Time, which is time you can spend actually doing jobs instead of out looking for jobs. So it is a real service. Lots of industry have agents, but it is again another. The commission rate is like 15% of your cut goes to your agent. So and sometimes that can be higher for illustrators. It varies, but typically writing agents is set standard wide is about 15%. So whatever your percent is. So and authors and illustrator, and I keep saying author and illustrator by the way because we do exclusively children's picture books. So we're always working with an author and an illustrator. But I'll just use the word creator to kind of encompass everything. So the creator would get a 7 to 15% royalty on every book sold. Typically, it starts off at 7%, and it escalates um, through different benchmarks of sales upwards. So you may have in your contract, you'll start with 7% on the first 100,000 or 20,000, whatever it is, and then you'll move to 10%, but you always cap out somewhere around 15%. And also, if you're famous and you've had lots of other books or you're a celebrity, you might start at 12 or 15. Typically, that reward though comes in advance. So if you're well known and they know you're going to be able to sell books, they calculate your advance based on how many copies they think you'll sell, because you don't end up making any royalties until after you've paid back the amount of your advance. So people want big advances because it guarantees them the money. You don't have to return that money, but you don't get any new money until you pass that amount of earning.
What happens if you don't? Like, what just happens if the book for some reason just, yeah, is that just on the publisher to eat the advance that they put out and they went, oh darn, we miscalculated?
Yeah. Advances are, once the advance is paid, that is the creator's money to keep. That's sort of, yeah, which is good. There is a safety net. The other nice thing about getting a bigger advance is it means your publisher has more skin in the game, right? They really want to put some PR behind it. PR is one of the other things that people find a lot of times. Bigger publishing companies, they come in, they expect to have a really great publicity machine, but they also have, 300 other books that they want to sell. And depending on where you are and how much money they think you're going to earn, how much they end up kind of giving you to your PR and your marketing. More and more of the responsibility of marketing and PR is falling back onto, especially with social media, they're pushing it onto the authors. Like, and they're now looking, this is in terms of breaking in, they're looking to see what your social media following is like. Do you have one? Are you well known? Do you have a lot of followers? And if you do, they're more likely to take on your book at this point, because it's an attention economy. And so they're always looking at the different metrics of what attention is, and if it changes again, it'll be something else that they leverage in there. But they
So why did you guys get into children's books specifically? Because I mean, you could also do the digital publishing space, which I know you guys do a bit of that too. But um, why children's books?
one, because that is kind of where my area of expertise is in terms of visual, storytelling. So it made sense to me. It was the area that I'm interested in, and want to be part of that creative process. I do the art direction for our children's books that we produce. I know a lot of illustrators, uh, and I love them. I have a 14-year-old daughter. I loved reading books. I had my friends published books that I would read to her. She's got books that are like written out to her from the author and illustrator. So you know, it's a magical time for reading and for creative thinking. So it's sort of a period in time that I think is really lovely to be in, and is so kind of, I don't know, makes me feel good to be in that space. So that's one of the aspects. That's where kind of my passion came forward to be in it and start thinking about it. But from a strictly business standpoint, it is the only segment of printed books that has not had massive loss in terms of sales to digital ebooks, because people still want to have the physical book when they sit down at night and they read with their kids. They don't want people on tablets all the time and engaging. A lot of our lives are spent digital, and Gen Z on is digital natives. Um, but there is something still really great about objects. We're still humans. We like objects. We like holding on to things and having them. And there's a sentimentality. Like, I have books that were handed down to me as a kid's book, that I have as kids' books that I read to my daughter, that I hope that one day she'll want to read if she decides to have kids, to her kids. So um, there is this nice history and tactile function that I think books in general have. I mean, I love books. I prefer to read a book in a physical form as well. But business wise, that has played out. So there is still a lot of printed books being sold. The other reason that it is not, as from a publisher standpoint, it's not having shrinkage, is it's very costly to do print on demand children's books. Like hardcover, print on demand, high quality color, where if you do a print on demand, it costs a lot more to actually put that out. So your revenue share is much smaller as a print on demand. And the quality also can fluctuate wildly on that. So if you want to put out a good product and have it be affordable, you really need to do large run offset printing for children's books. So it's still something very much dominated by a traditional printing process versus the print on demand, which has been eating a lot of the market share.
So on the print on demand side, I mean, with kind of mistakes in the artwork, I'm only playing devil's advocate here because I'm with you, but oh, it's a children's book. They may not remember like the quality of the artwork. Oh, it's kind of whimsical and fun if it's not like completely accurate. Like, it just makes us more money at the end of the day. Like, what's the case for actually going, no, this actually does need to be accurate.
I think it's twofold. One is, the kids don't buy the books, the parents do. So in terms of the quality, and the kids won't care, the parents do. I think they're still the ones that are being appealed to, um, and maybe not everyone does, and it definitely can be a, a game of economics for some people too, accessibility. And I've got crappy kids books in my children's book collection, but that's fine. So it's not all of them have to be one way or the other. I'm not a big or person. I'm an and person. So I think that there's room for both, and need for both, really too. I mean, if you have a great book and you want to get it printed and you can't find a publisher, then do print on demand. I applaud that. I think that that's there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different process to do it. But I do think that there is still enough demand for it, and just number wise, that has proven out. It continues to grow. There's uh, in the United States, $2.5 billion of children's books were sold last year. A little bit more, 2.6 billion. Worldwide, it's 13 point something million. Billion, B. So children's books is a very, very large.
Well, and I definitely know the case for high quality. I remember, and you'll probably know this book. When I was a kid, I Milo and the Magical Stone was like my favorite. And it was just this crazy one because you had a different ending. You could choose your own ending in a children's book. It wasn't just like turn the page and keep going. It's like, oh, well, you could skip ahead 10 pages and it could be completely different. But the actual stone, I'll never forget. Like it was a high quality print because the stone shimmered. Like there was actual like specialty print. And I remember that as a kid now because of the print. And I find that to be that's so valuable when you're a kid because you're inspired by the things that you see, touch, feel. I mean, it's not we're not really introduced as kids to the economics of it at that age. It's more about the wonder and the excitement. And so how do you guys print, I guess, differently, better, more consistently? How does that work?
So I wouldn't say our printer is better. We're not reinventing printing. It's high quality, so it's offset printing. They do test runs. We make sure the color is accurate. Everyone gets a copy, the author and the illustrator and the publisher beforehand. So they do a small batch, and we review it, make sure everything looks really good. And then you print off, 30,000 of them, however many you need to do in that run. Um, and they're hardback. And so the printer we are partnering with is in California. So one of the aspects you were asking earlier is, well, why print and ship all the way from a different country to come here, because it still ends up being cheaper than printing in the United States. So just in terms of, because everyone's getting paid less and the processes don't have OSHA, you don't have to meet compliances on certain levels. So uh, for us, though, there are two aspects that led me to make this decision. One was just thinking about the environmental impact of going into an industry. And the great thing about starting now and starting from scratch is you can look at every single aspect and say, well, how can I build this in the best way possible at this moment in time? And you're not having to reinvent the wheel necessarily, but maybe you make it a better wheel. Um, and so printing overseas, and I looked at that. I got quotes in China and then in India. Um, and tried to get some insight into what their printing process was like, which was very uh, hard to kind of get a straight answer on. Um, and it was cheap. I mean, it's wow, it's much more affordable. So our books cost a lot more, but we know I've been out, I've toured the facility, I met with the owner of our printer. They, you know, have good quality, safety facilities, and they have designated work hours, and their employees are paid well and compensated well. Um, and they fall within the forestry guidelines. So we know that all the wood that's being sourced, the average uh, American uses 6 trees worth of paper annually in daily life. So if we can know that, but say, well, how do we, make sure those trees are renewable trees, or that they're being planted especially for those purposes, and that the process they're being used is environmentally sound. And the only real way that I found to be able to verify that is to work with a certified printing company, and have it done in the United States or Canada. Canada is also, and there are lots in Europe as well, and not to say that there are not some in China or India as well. But we also wanted to avoid the shipping costs. So one of the other really great things that I wanted to do, and this was sort of actually the last piece of the puzzle, was our printer partner. Um, because I wanted to find some place that limited the amount of transportation of the book. And so this particular company, AccuTrack, they're outside the Bay Area, great company. So anybody's interested, that's who they are. Um, they started off as a fulfillment tech company. So they basically would had API that back ended into an ordering platform, anybody's ordering platform, and then they would do the fulfilling portion after the order was done. And then they went into printing, I think it was CD covers, and packaging those and shipping them out. And of course, as CDs died, they pivoted, and they were like, we already invested a lot in these printers. Why don't we, invest a little bit more in getting to printing publishing books? And they started off with, trade books, industry books, education, and things like that, and then started to expand. And they're expanding still. They've kind of outgrown the current facility. But what they do, which is so great, and why we love them, is when someone orders a book from us on our website, they automatically are notified that that order's been placed. Now they have printed our books, so like and then they hand cart them from one side of the warehouse over to the other side, which is the fulfillment center, and so they pack and ship. So our books go from the printer directly to the buyer. So there's one trip that it has to make. Um, and it doesn't seem like, or could have gone to a warehouse and then gone out again, but you know, that's a lot. So it was just a process of looking at, like, can I find something that reduces it down to the very minimum number of steps that it has to go through? We're still going to be causing damage to the environment, right? There's because I'm making a book. There's no way around that. But what can I reduce it to a level that is, uh, at this point in time, as minimal as possible? And hopefully, it advances and it'll get better. I don't know. Um, Technology is great like that. It continues to evolve. And I think if you're open to evolving with it and building out in a way that it allows for sort of a module construction of a company, so that you can continue to change one component out as it improves. That's sort of what our kind of company philosophy of building is like. So that, okay, well, this is now no longer functioning. And it happens, I think maybe it's a product of growing up living through like all the iPhones, you know, it's, and it's going to change, and there's going to, your old one's going to stop working. So I kind of feel like in a couple of years, some part of our company is going to have to change and will be defunct, because they're not going to be the same connecting cables anymore. And I'm going to have to buy a new cable. Then it'll be USB, and now it's USB-C, and something like that's going to happen. And you have to be ready for that. And if you are, I think you can advance and stay uh, very nimble, and allows you to continue to be able to function and grow, but grow in a more healthy and productive way.
Well, what I love about your approach too is that it's very intentional around cutting out the process, because like, yes, you're printing a book. And the reason why I was really excited to have this episode too is like book printing is very much considered not sustainable, right? Even if you use the trees properly and all that, it's still considered like this, oh, well, why not just go digital, less trees? But it's to look at, this is progress and not perfection. And that's what, we stand on as a brand, is that we're not going to be completely 100% perfect, because it takes energy. It takes things to produce anything, whether that's your digital print. There's going to be computing power that is also energy to send that digital print elsewhere, and for you to download it, for you to power your device and then charge your device. But what I found interesting is this cut down of the supply chain of, you're taking almost like 10 or 12 steps and bringing it down to like 3. And then knowing that, hey, we're still going to always have to build on top of this and take a modular approach, because I think, yeah, it and speaking to like the passing down of books through generations, if you had a digital print of the book, like, sure, you could put it on the new device, but your the original iPod doesn't really function in today's world. It's super cool, but like, it doesn't exactly function. And so the actual book will outlast the technology, because it can just transcend it. It doesn't need technology in order to function. And I think we've all fallen, I guess, like, victim to the idea of like, we buy this tech piece because we're like, this is going to be the last one I got to get. And then like 3 or 4 years later, you're like, uh-oh, we're in an issue. And we have to do that a lot in I would imagine you do too, in high quality illustration or high quality filmmaking or design. Generally, you need a max computing power for you to be more efficient. And so you buy the top of the line graphics card and all the things that you need, but then and it lasts as long as you possibly can make it last. 5 years is like, wow. And then you got to do it again. And so you do the best you can on a digital aspect, but the book can actually be passed on. And I guess, so what does it look like when you guys start to think about the longevity of some of these pieces? Because you guys are creating books, high quality, they're made to last, but also the illustration, the stories, like, what are you building out as a publishing company? What's kind of the ethos around not just the process, but the actual stories themselves?
Oh, that's great. And I love that analogy, by the way, of the handing it down, because I can't tell you, I've probably bought De La Soul 3 Feet High and Rising on I had it on LP, then I had it on cassette, I had it on CD, MP3, and then that, got changed and lost over. And now I listen to it through I had to buy it on Apple Music. So I've bought it 5 times minimum. So, and that's not the only album. So yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And I also love the idea of that, digital stuff only exists if there's electricity. And there's an interesting component to thinking about something that exists outside the frame of electricity.
I take so I am kind of big into productivity and how I can best optimize everything that I do, because I run a company and I also have a personal life, and it's like you have to kind of somehow find the balance between the two. And when you look at productivity, a lot of it, you have a lot of amazing digital tools, but I write it in a notebook because I live on an island and we lose power in the winter. When you lose power, what's your list? What do you have to get done? What are your things that you actually need to keep track of? You only have as much as your battery lasts. And I think that's the huge case for paper. And I'm a huge like pencil and paper person, actually, weirdly enough, running a sustainability company, um, because I use one notebook and it lasts for the entire year. And then I have a record of everything that I did, and I keep it, because it is something to, I think, keep your story.
I agree. I still write paper and pencil notes all the time, or pen really, but yeah, I, part of it is, I think, as a function as being a painter. I've thought a lot about the idea of digital and movement and kind of the life that is in digital artwork, which I think is absolutely fascinating and hard to compete with on some levels. But I also know that my paintings exist constantly, always. right? They're there. I mean, they're nowhere else. They're in one spot. They're there, and they could be destroyed. They could be burned, but they exist whether or not they're being turned on or not. And that there's something about that I like. Um, but to went on a little tangent there. But to get back to your question about like kind of the stories that we are writing, um, for me, I think you can only really do well what you love a lot. And so the stories that I'm attracted to publishing are the stories that I'd be attracted to read as a parent, um, which do have range, but they all, for me, have some kernel of a truth in them. Uh, and not to say, I don't think all books have to be happy books for kids. Um, but I think the kernel of truth of the emotion of the book, right? That they're not superficial. That they can be fun, they can be whimsical, but there's an emotional truth to them. And so I was having a conversation with an author that is pitching a manuscript to us now, um, and was giving him some feedback on the story. I was talking about the idea that you have to write children's books like you're writing for an adult, not because of the adult reading, but because of the kid reading them, because kids understand so much more. They just not don't necessarily have the vocabulary to express it all, or the understanding of story structure to be able to want to know all the story structure or how to ask for that. But it needs to be all there. And then you just simplify it down, down, and down, and down until it fits into the lexicon that they can understand and the length of that they can pay attention for. But the story has to be way, way bigger and told in a much larger way. So I actually think writing children's books is super hard because of that aspect. You have to have the same amount of care and understanding of your character and their motivation and their backstory that you do if you're going to sit down and you're going to write a novel for an adult. But you don't have the luxury of describing all of that backstory or the nuances of that character. You have to get it all across, and then the illustrator, the art comes and marries with it and does all that descriptive stuff. So there's two really amazing creative forces that have to come together to make a great story, and they both carry the same weight, I think. Being dyslexic growing up, I loved comic books, but reading was a real struggle for me in terms of being able to just like, my brain doesn't work quite right like that. And so the illustrations, I would make up 90% of the story. But I could figure it out because comic books were well drawn in the action sequence. And then, you'd pick up a keywords and stuff like that. And then you had the whole book. I knew what the comic book was about and kind of the whole story, but not necessarily without reading every single word. But that's the weight that you have to bring, the illustrations have to bring. They have to bring that whole secondary level of the universe and explain it in another way and enrich it. And if you have both of those, you have really, really outstanding illustrators getting to look and envision and create on top of this really fertile soil of a story. What you get is great. So that's what I look for. I look for stories that when I read them, I start to see the movie in my head. And then I look for the artist that I think can see that movie maybe differently, but just as beautifully. And then you put them together, and yeah, that's for me. All the books that I've read, I think, happened that way. And sometimes as the author illustrator, you have great books. Oliver Jeffers is a great example, um, who was the illustrator for The Day the Crayons Quit, and is a great painter, from Ireland and Brooklyn as well. I had the pleasure of having come in before he blew up and became really famous to come and share his sketchbooks with my Parsons students and talk with another friend of mine, Mac Primo, both super talented artists.
So two things there. I mean, one, do you feel like the dyslexia actually gave you an advantage to be able to paint better? Because I think when you go deeper on dyslexia and how I guess creativity and dyslexia actually kind of come together, a lot of that they kind of fuel one another. I mean, you see Richard Branson on the Virgin Atlantic side, or Virgin just Galactic, or whatever Virgin branch of the company it is, a lot of what he leans on is dyslexia, and a lot of extremely creative and successful entrepreneurs, whether they're in the creativity space or even just the business space, the ability to see problems differently. Do you think it gave you kind of an advantage to see how to do things differently?
I didn't until very recently. And I actually had this another author we're talking to is a neuropsychologist who studies the brain and deals with learning disabilities. Explained to me the brain mechanics of dyslexia, which is fascinating. But it really does. Your brain, on the other side of your brain, starts doing some of the lifting for you when you have the dyslexia, and you're not able to figure this part out with this one. So this turns on, and I starts to activate it. And then it's not the most efficient, but it creates these different networks and processes. And so I think that that probably was a component in terms of how my creative processing went. And when I think about problems, I come up with different solutions than probably most other people would. Um, and I think realizing that, I think, is the real superpower. If you like realize like, oh, I can think differently, and that is a good thing, and then lean into that different process that is, that allows you to solve things differently. So I recently joined the board of directors for a nonprofit in New York City called Comprehensive Youth Development. Works with day night schools in New York City. So it's helped provide services to unrepresented communities and students that can't go through the normal system of the schools due to immigration status or because of jobs or aging out. So they service up to 24-year-olds, and they allow enrollment at different periods of time. But it's mostly on the board of directors, bankers and lawyers, very traditional, kind of all very interested in education. It's an awesome organization. But when the board of directors who I met speaking on a panel last year on creating access in Web3 um, asked me to come on, she was like, "We need somebody who thinks different." And so coming in and starting to like look at, not trying to solve the problems, and even all the way down to like fundraising, like how do we fundraise differently than we have been? Um, they wanted someone that was a creative thinker. And so that's, really never did I think I would be on the board of directors of a nonprofit, but, you know, here I am because of the fact that I think differently. So I do think that if you recognize that how you think, I think everyone actually does think differently, but if you recognize how you think and start to lean into how you think instead of how you think you should think, then you can really take advantage of that and exploit it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a really cool aspect of that in the creative process. I mean, I took a screenwriting class in high school, and it's probably one of the most pivotal classes I ever took. And it was because you learned a lot about, how, yeah, you watch a movie and you dive right in. And for some reason, you're like, oh, I'll figure out a person's history eventually. And sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. But that character is it's so relatable because they quote unquote have a history. You write the backstory in, and you write everything in, and then going and learning that, yeah, the screenplay is one thing, but the actual audio is 50% of what a film actually is. The other 50% is the film itself. And how can you best like marry all of these different aspects to actually tell a comparing narrative and have somebody feel something? And I think when I was a kid, what I loved about films specifically was the ones that actually were so real. Like there was just there was something to it that it spoke to you about the trueness, and that's speaking to kind of your enjoyment out of books is like there's something rooted in reality in it. There's like a true lesson or a true message through the whole thing. Do you think that I'm not going to say is missing, but like, do you think that that's kind of an important component in children's books in general? Because I think for us to shape a better world, whether that's a more sustainable world, a more kind world, whatever that is, um, I feel like we need creativity to be part of that. And I feel like that pivotal time of children's books is kind of when that happens because you get lost in something else. It's just so exciting as a child. So do you think that that's like a really important component?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I think grabbing kids at that age where they're just starting to explore concepts and ideas and stories. The reason I think we all love movies or film or reading is it allows us to experience other worlds and lives, and that's hugely important in kind of fostering empathy as well. Um, but so grabbing kids at that age where that entree into that idea of, oh, I can let my mind decouple from my reality and go off and explore in a different way and feel these different emotions or experience someone else's different emotions is really critical. Yeah. um, and I think that by one of the things that we're doing for Fair Share is, we definitely, as we're tech heavy, so we're embrace kind of all aspects of that. It's like we've built out a little metaverse, a online world where kids can go, and so they drop in and they get to interact with art and writing, so they can foster that sense of creativity that they're starting to experience. I think kids copy as a way of learning how to do things. And I mean, I remember drawing the characters a million times from the comic books, and from those the first entry into like really trying to learn this through copying. So by having a space in the metaverse, you can go in and you can submit some artwork, and it gets put up on a gallery wall that lives in this metaverse. And there's no, you know, it's the same idea as like the sticking your artwork up on the fridge in the parents' room, right? In your house, and uh, that validation that kind of comes with that is often missing in a lot of kids' lives. And by we don't curate the work. If you do a drawing and you like it and you submit it to us, it will go up, and we put it in a little digital frame. And it has your first name or your nickname or your superhero name, whatever you want it to be, next to it. And other people, you can invite your friends to go look at it. And the same thing with books. So we have a process where if you want to write a story and illustrate it, we'll digitally publish it in a little flipping book that will live on a bookshelf. So you can go and you can see your book there as a little digital book and flip through the pages and be able to share that with other people. And we do have partners that you can link out to that are like drawing programs for kids. We're going to have videos where authors and the illustrators come in and talk about the process of creating it. So we want to, kids are going to spend time in the digital realm. That's all there is to it. And I think if you try and deny that or block that, you're doing a disservice. It's not a bad thing, but creating a space where they can go play games, interact, be creative if they want to be, and be able to share that creativity is really important to us. And so by using the book as the avenue to get them to, like, if they read the book, there's a QR code, they can scan it, or they can go to the website and jump in to this metaverse from there. And the books can continue to go on and have greater lives. The by taking technology and kind of creating more life for each book. So we digitally enhance all of our books so that as you read the book the 900th time to your kids, it can get a little taxing, no matter how good the story is. And our thought was, well, what if we continue to have content that grows upon the book so that that book is not stale and stagnant anymore? So, if there's a joke in a book, maybe the next week it's a different joke. And then the third week it's another joke. Or there's a video component, or you can have it be AR enabled so that you can have games pop up, or you can see animation happen. Now that's content creation that we pay for. So that you're actually giving more for the same price book. So it's not we're not making a better book, we're making a bigger book, a fuller book.
Oh, I love that because I think the experience that a reader can get, I mean, it's full all encompassing. I think one of the favorite things that I read about just like this idea of a metaverse is, and we have talked about this before, and this idea that in Minecraft there's a completely forbidden library where people can have access to books in countries where they're not allowed to read them. They can go in Minecraft, they can go find them, and they can read it. And to me, like, that's exciting, and it's using the power of technology to help. And I think when you give people that runway, that ability to dive into something in a more engaging way. So like the story suddenly can come to life and now you're part of that story and then you can put your artwork on the metaphorical fridge. Like I think there's an excitement around that. And it gives somebody an experience. And I think a lot of people think metaverse and they're like, oh, well, it's just this weird digital place where people are just going to escape. And what about the real world? And they should be in the real world. And I don't think it's about that at all. I think it's about the marriage of the two. It's to be able to access a different space. It's almost like walking into a different room. It's all you're doing. There will come a point where you take those goggles off, or you put your phone down, and you will have this wonderful world that we are surrounded by. And so I think it's just opening things in a different way. And I think the way you guys are enabling it is fascinating because I think you're blending the NFT side slash blockchain slash Web3 side and the future of technology with very much this like literal storied history of books. Um, did you ever think when you started, like just life painting, that you were going to be right here doing this?
Absolutely not. No. 100% no. Yeah.
So what does it feel to like now you're in this position, you're running Fair Share Publishing, um, you're on the board of a nonprofit. I mean, how does it feel to be in your position? Like reflecting on that.
I feel very privileged. I mean, it's it's a it was not a straight line or one that was planned out, and I think partly by my design, I try not to have too many things like that set up, and um, I don't think if I had this as my goal, I don't think I would be where I am, to be honest. Um, all the different odd side stories or side quests that I've been on through my life have all influenced and built parts of my knowledge base and my inspiration and desires, and have kind of all coalesced here at this point. And I don't know if this is the end point. I mean, maybe this is the beginning of another thing that then builds. It's just another building block. And hopefully it is. I mean, I hope that everything continues to build and grow. I have some specific goals that I hope Fair Share will do, besides being successful and giving a lot more money back to creators, which is kind of the ultimate foundational goal of Fair Share, was to create a company that made it sustainable for artists to be able to get paid for their work and live off of that and be able to spend time creating the next great thing. So I definitely believe, 'cause I think about like, why do I make art a lot? So this is kind of something to go back to answer this question a little bit, because it seems like the most self-indulgent activity, right? It's completely unnecessary from a practical standpoint, but it is the thing that is most necessary from a soul standpoint, in my opinion. The world needs beauty. It's something that humans have always done, is to create. And I think that there's lots of things that are artistic. I'm not talking about just painting. Um, but like, why do we need to make, a door handle attractive? Why do these things bring us pleasure and joy? And there's a lot of beauty in the world, but we've also, I think, humans have been creating a lot of ugliness and destructiveness in their life and our history on this planet. And I think we've are balancing that out with the creation of beauty at the same time. And I try to answer the question of like, why do we need beauty, by imagining a world without it? And it's a bleak, bleak gray square space. It's like that. I think the '70s was a good period to look at when you want to see what '70s architecture, the brutalist architecture. You know, that is, I think, art without beauty, where it's strictly function and form and function. That marriage. I mean, that's a art school conversation you can have for a long, long time. But so if I can do something that enables more beauty to be created by more people, uh, that is not just me making art, that's me facilitating a lot more people making art. It's one of the things I loved about teaching at Parsons for so long was it was this process of sharing and the creation of that beauty and helping other people unlock their voice and continuing to spread that forward. And I'm just a continuation in that path. Like I was greatly influenced by my professors at RISD. I'm still super close friends with, and getting to kind of pass that down throughout the generations, and hopefully, something I've said to someone sticks with them down the line as well. So that is one of the things I hope that Fair Share does is that it continues to enable and is successful in a way that um, makes other publishing companies realize that they can look at how they're functioning differently and you know maybe make them think about, oh well, we have more room to pay better. um, I don't think we'll ever be scale to really compete with them. We're always going to be throwing the toothpicks at them. But if we pay 50% of net, which basically ends up being about 35% of retail versus their 7. So our entire ethos was all the savings that we are creating through technology, we actually just going to pass on to the creators and not to the company. It's not a function of greed. I don't need $1 billion. I have everything I need. So I'm satisfied. I'm fulfilled. So I don't need to create more copious amounts of wealth for myself. But if I can generate that, like I said, $2.6 billion of children's books, that's a lot of money. And I don't think that's all going to the artists and the creators that are making these books. And a lion's share really should be. And so, yeah, hopefully it'll be a little bit of a drive of changing the overall industry as well.
Where do you find your inspiration in your day-to-day life, whether it's to do art, to create beauty, how do you find it?
I have found it as I've gotten older harder, and I don't know if that is a reflection of the capacity of information to be shared, being able to know more and more about all of the world's problems and issues more continuously and in more detail. I grew up in the time where you watch the daily news, not the daily news. I mean, I watched that too. Wow, Jon Stewart, come back. Um, but like the world nightly news, there would be like an international portion of it. It was like, well, when you change the channel by hand on the TV. And that was, unless you read the newspaper from front to back, that was the 15 minutes of hearing about the world that you had. And it was an inaccurate and small peephole that we were seeing. But now, you have full floodlights constantly, and it's a lot of horrible shit. Um, that's a lot to hold out. And I have like I said, my daughter's 14, and I see the weight of this on her generation a lot. Like the weight and the responsibility is so ever present, and in every aspect of everywhere they turn are these massive end of world scale issues that they are being confronted with, and it's very very heavy. And I know I feel that on a regular basis, so I can't imagine. And I have a lot more calluses, right? So I think on our young generation it's really really hard. So where I get my inspiration from a lot is I think about my daughter a lot, and wanting to make a better place for her, a place that's not as harsh and ugly. um, and there's a it's a great honor to be someone that gets to help facilitate that and create beauty.
I mean, I can't imagine being a kid nowadays. Like I say this a lot at Goat that we're going to do everything that we can as a company to empower the next generation, because realistically we're not the generation to do it. We're not going to be able to change the thing. It is going to be the next generation, the Gen Z and the Generation Alpha, who are actually going to have the opportunity to shift the world. We just have to lay down the runway and allow them to do it. And I think there's such a responsibility in it. I think that I feel running Goat, that I'm sure you feel running Fair Share. There's almost this inherent responsibility to create a better world. I think when you do go deeper and you see the different facets of the world, it can be depressing, and it can be heavy, and it can be a lot to handle, and it can often feel hopeless. And I think that our role as Goat is to say, yes, this stuff happens, and it is happening. However, look at what these other people are doing. Look at the people like you that are doing this. Like, these are the people that are actually shifting the narrative. They are changing the world. And we all have the opportunity and the technology and the access and the ability to support all of these people. And through, we've never been more connected in the entire history of the world. We've never been more connected than we are now, to be able to send somebody a message in a place that we couldn't fly to in 36 hours. We can change things. And that is what we want to really root things in, is like, there is an inherent positivity about this. And I think it's almost that argument of like, humans are inherently good versus evil. And, if, and my hope is that everybody believes that humans are inherently good. Because I think if people search deep enough inside themselves, they might say, yeah, I'm a good person. And if we apply that to the next person and the next person and the next person, then maybe we'll get somewhere. And that's all our hope is, especially at Goat and through sharing stories of people like you, it's to show that, like, hey, the good people are out there, and all it takes is your willingness to support them, and our world can go in a lot better direction. And that's, I think, the exciting part, but also knowing that, yeah, it's the next generation. They're going to be the ones that are going to do it. And, my hope also for that generation is that they, and this is my excitement around Web3 and blockchain and this idea of transparency. It's the ability to show, because Gen Z and Generation Alpha, they just want to know which direction is the right one. And then they know how to choose the right one. I think the morals are there. The belief is there. It's just, they got to know the right path. And so the easier that path is to see, the easier it is to walk down. And of course it won't be straight. Never is. But how can we get it as real as possible and give a 30,000 foot view of what a good path can look like?
Yeah, well said. And I love that about what you are doing with Sustainable Goat. I've listened to some of the podcasts, and it is very hopeful, interesting, because it does feel, trying to empty the ocean with a thimble sometimes on your own out there. And but you do see other people. I was listening the other day to the one about the reusing the uranium. Man, I felt so much better when I finished that podcast. I was like, oh, there's a chance. Wait a minute. it's you know, it's yeah, and I think getting these kind of stories out there help you feel like, okay, well, I'll keep with my thimble. Because if everyone has a thimble, then you got the whole ocean. But we don't know that everyone else has a thimble, because it's not really what we're shown a lot. Where media is, unfortunately, the algorithms have figured out that if they can make you angry, you will hate scroll longer than if you feel good, and that's unfortunate.
That's where I think we land in the media space. It's really trying to show transparency around it, but also, like, I think one of the greatest gifts that I get to have is to talk to people like you and talk to people who are recycling nuclear energy, to people building algae technology, and like all of these different components of like your brain almost explodes with how much crazy things are happening in the world right now, in the material space, in the energy space, in the food space. I mean, we have true innovation happening. And at the root of all of it, and this is why I was so excited to talk to you, is that it goes back to creativity. Like, people are wondering, in their minds, they're envisioning a world that can be different. And then they're like, cool, let's give it a shot. And it's because of that creativity, that willingness, and the inspiration, I think, of being a kid and thinking that it could be different from a children's book. I think that that's where it begins, because then you inspire almost like a personality. I mean, it's such a pivotal time of development, childhood, that it lays the groundwork for the rest of the life. It doesn't mean that you can't, change and shift, because we all do, but it's so important. And that's why I view what you're working on to be so important in the broader scope of whether it be sustainability or creating a better world or kindness or community or circularity, whatever that is. Like, the children's books are kind of where it's at. Um, and so I think, what would be your hope for, I guess, the coming years of Fair Share, and what you hope the rest of the publishing industry can do to make things better? Because I think that is a huge piece of, making the future a little bit of a better place.
Um, for fair share, I hope it continues to succeed. I think it is a bit, um, talk about creativity. I- it's insane for one person to think that they can do this. So I've had some of my friends and people that have come across and had discussions with about fair share, like, so who's backing you, or what made you think you could do this? I was like, oh, I think I have no idea why I thought I could do this. But because of technology, and because in particular the blockchain, there is this ability to make bigger impacts. You can 10x and 100x your productivity and your influence and your reach in a way that can never happen before. Like, I would not be able to do this, what I'm doing now, even a year ago,
Hmm.
never mind 5 years ago. So I hope that it continues to get easier in terms of fair share. I hope we continue to attract great people, storytellers, and artists who want to say the same things and share the same kind of core values. um, I hope that other publishers look at what we're doing in our model and take that model. So was my wife, who's a huge supporter of this. None of this would happen without her support. Uh, Paula was saying to me, she's like, "Well, what are you going to do when you have all this transparency and how you work is all out there? Someone just comes along and does the same thing." I said, "That's great. I'll tell them how." It's like it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to make the books or the way that we're doing it less important or valuable. And I actually hope it does. So in terms of the hope for how the impact it has, I hope it as I was saying before, I hope it pushes other and larger publishing companies, because it's harder, I think, for smaller companies who are already going to pivot, but for bigger corporations to be able to look at how they're doing things and change that infrastructure. You know, we only are in the United States right now, and we're only in the United States because as we grow, we have to find the same partners within each country. So we want to expand to Europe. We have to find a printer that will do the same thing in Europe, because we're not going to be shipping around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that I hope that we can continue to expand and or inspire other people to go and expand as well on the same plan that we're working on.
Nice. And how can people find Fair Share, and connect with you, get to know you, reach out, submit a manuscript?
Yeah. So fairsharepublishing.com, also fairsharebooks.com. Go to the same website. That's our website. Our first two physical books are coming out in the end of May. On the website, there is a submissions page. So that's a form you can fill out if you're an author as a manuscript idea. Just fill that out. And if you're listening to the podcast and you want to circumvent all of that just because you listen to Sustainable Goat, you can email me directly. We'll bypass the filters. And it's Nathan@fairsharepublishing.com. So that's your reward for sitting through us having a good time having a conversation.
Exactly. and taking 10 steps and putting it down to 3, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And where's your favorite place to enjoy nature? I mean, you've lived in 13 places, so I'd imagine there's quite a big list. But where's your favorite place to enjoy nature?
Well, right now, so I moved down to New York City during the pandemic. So I live in Westchester now, and very fortunate that I have a small amount of woods behind my house. So I like to have coffee and sit out back and just listen to the birds in the morning. That's my most regular place. But man, there is a couple of spots outside of Boulder in the foothills, just a little north of town. There's an Eagles sanctuary that therefore there's trails you can go and hike up, and it's stunning. It's a little canyon. And then I'd say southeastern Utah is a place that is unreal. It is not like anywhere else landscape wise on the planet. It's like getting to go to Mars, and it's just beautiful. I did a month of camping when I was between my junior and senior year in college. And this no cell phones, right? So, and no GPS. I had an actual map and my dog in a pickup truck, and I camped for a month out there. Learned some lessons, but it's absolutely stunning. It's a beautiful, magical place.
Wow. Well, Nathan, thank you. I honestly, I'm just blown away by what you're working on and why you're doing it. And I just know that it not only shifted my mind on just kind of how to look at, honestly, like children's books. I mean, I think when we first met, it was kind of like, well, isn't it just like printing every other book? And then you're like, no, there's this whole world, and it just opened up everything. So just thank you for sharing that with everybody on the podcast, but also like thank you for doing what you're doing, because I think it's really powerful.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to come on. It's been a real pleasure, and a real pleasure getting to listen to all the other great guests you had. So it's a really outstanding effort what you're doing. And I can't wait for more of the video stuff to come out, because that's so awesome to see already. The teasers you have gives you goosebumps to watch that. So thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really fun. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the GOAT podcast. You are the reason why we exist and why we show up every single day.
You know, I've spent too many years being against stuff, and I've found now that it's a little bit easier and a little bit more fun to be for something.
How are we going to power the world? How are we going to build the world? How are we going to feed the world?
Company isn't just good or bad, black or white. Usually there's a lot more there, a lot more that they don't know.
It's actually about what you do in your daily life every day can make a huge difference.
Give this episode a share, join our GOAT community, but most importantly, go spend some time in nature, because you might find it a meaningful reminder of the amazing place that we get to call home. I'm Steve Cassingham, and we'll see you next time.